I was born and raised in Western Siberia, and on the far north of Siberia, where summer lasts probably a couple of months, and winter is 7 to 8 months, gets pretty cold. We had a kindergarten in front of our house, an apartment building. And I remember going there very often because the gate wasn't closed. Although I couldn't really play there, nobody could. All the carousels or teeter-totters, they were broken. Not a single piece of equipment was working. Our main source of entertainment was a carcass of a building. It wasn't finished. There was some kind of crisis, and it was very it wasn't finished. It was at the very early stage of development. And as kids, we would go to the territory because the fence deteriorated, and it wasn't a problem to get there. And we were jumping from one concrete wall to another among some rusty metal rods. And that was fun. It was so much fun that once my mother was very pissed with me because I came home almost at midnight, and I couldn't even understand that it was midnight because it was summer. And in summer, we had white nights. That's how far to the north I lived. It was pretty bright outside, and I didn't know it was late. Despite all this brokenness, I thought that I lived in the best country in the world. I was lucky and privileged. I mean, we had the biggest territory. It has to mean something. And we launched the first spacecraft into space and the first man into space. Oh, I was especially excited about that. Space was occupying my mind since my grandfather taught me how to distinguish different constellations, how to see comets, etc. I've been obsessed with space and the universe my entire life. And that kind of provided me some sense of escapism. I was reading books because my parents were busy with work. And they didn't really share any of my interests. So I was fine with books. The books were interesting. And in those books, I was learning about stars, black holes, and elementary particles. But also, I really loved Soviet science fiction. I know you don't really have access to that here, but it is fascinating. Especially, I love those stories when you can time travel to the future. And of course, it's communist future. Everyone is friendly. You know, they have flying cars. Yeah, I was especially excited about flying cars and starships with cosmonauts, of course. And it was giving me pride because I never thought of it as science fiction. For me, as a kid, those were prophecies. And I was looking forward to see that bright future with flying cars and starships to the moon or Alpha Centauri. I was extremely proud to live in Russia. And I thought I was extremely lucky to be born there. Especially after reading some stories that did mention, those were very few stories, but they did mention Americans. I haven't seen an American for a very long time since that point. My first time seeing a foreigner would happen many years after. So the vision that I got from that was that there is this land overseas, and that land is populated by some wicked creatures It was very bizarre and strange for me as a kid. What did we do to you? Why do you hate us so much? That was the vision, and that was the reality for me. I think the first time when that picture changed happened in 2001. I often see how on TV, when people talk about 9/11, they often say something like, we all remember what we were doing when 9/11 happened. I do remember what I was doing. I was 13, I lived in Siberia, and I came home from school, and it was on TV. One tower already collapsed, and the other one was on fire, and then it collapsed as I watched it. It was like watching a movie, because something so terrible can happen only in movies. It was unreal and incomprehensible. But then a thing happened that to this day I am deeply ashamed of it. I'm so embarrassed that I've never spoken about it in public. I thought, oh, nice. They finally got what they deserved. And I remember how a few days later, when my mom saw a picture on my desktop, and it was a picture, just a static image of one of the towers with explosion, because everyone in our class installed those wallpapers. And I thought it was sense of justice. And my mom saw it. Why did you put it on the screen? It's a tragedy. But those are Americans. Yes, they are Americans, and people are dying. It's a tragedy. It should be, it's a bad thing. And that was the tipping point for me. Until that moment, I didn't think about Americans as human beings because they never been presented to me as human beings. And when you never seen something and you have only one side of the story, whatever story that is, you get a particular image, maybe some bizarre creatures with dog heads, you know, like those Egyptian gods. And even with those picture with explosion, you don't really see any human being there. It's just objects. And that was the first time when I finally realized, oh my gosh, that actually happened, and it happened to real people. Although I was pretty young, I still can't deal with my feelings about the ideas that happened to be in my head back then. But moving forward, I turned 18 and I joined the military. My father thought every man should do that. And if you never had a military experience, you're not really a man. That was a stupid idea, but it is what it is. I joined the military, and that was quite an experience. It deserved a whole separate story on its own. I would just say that if you want to know what Russian army is like, if you've seen any movies or TV shows about prison life, it kind of gives you some sense. It was basically a prison, and between each other, we were calling it a prison term. Because in Russia, you're supposed to serve a mandatory period of time there. The first month was absolute hell. Starting with a climate that I wasn't used to. Only after 1 month, I could finally breathe the air. You are completely isolated from your previous life, and you have to get used to that. It was very tough. And I remember at some point, after about 1 month, one of my comrades received a letter from his friend who already served his term. And that was the first bright light in that whole 3-year experience for me, because that letter was very funny. I don't remember many details from that, but I remember it was very clever and very funny. And at the very end, there was a sentence that carved into my brain. His friend told him, brace yourself, look around, watch people, and don't bring yourself to their level. That idea, that sentence, transformed my life, and I count myself as before and after that point. I realized that the maturity isn't always right. And it's not only okay to stand against a form of injustice, it is your duty. You can't be a bystander when you see that someone else is getting hurt. And you also have to stand for yourself if you believe so. In 3 years in the military, I've seen a lot of things, very ugly things. I've seen a lot of corruption. Now, watching the news, nothing really surprised me there. There was one moment when I accidentally became a witness of a crime. My senior officer was framed for a crime that he didn't commit because someone else wanted his position. And I just happened to be there and see how the money was brought to the cabinet. The people who made it happen couldn't really let me go with that. They really needed my senior officer to leave. And one day, I was called to an FSB office. And if you don't know what FSB is, you probably heard of it by the former name, KGB. It is FBI, CIA, and all the other agencies combined into one super agency with lots and lots of power, practically unlimited. I wasn't interrogated. Nobody yelled at me or anything, but the officer who talked to me made it very clear that in my best interest to stay quiet unless I want to be charged with treason. I remember coming out of the tent. You know how in movies when there was some kind of explosion and the character has this kind of ringing in the ears and you feel disoriented, the world around you is spinning. That's how I felt. I was terrified and I felt betrayed because I have so many senior officers around, but not a single one of them would do anything. Mostly because they were involved in corruption and they could be framed for anything. They didn't even have to be framed because they were corrupt. But that sense of helplessness shifted my world. There was no longer any greatness that I was accustomed to. I realized that our army won't protect the country if something happens. And all those cool stories about the great past and the great future are no more than just stories. And not only stories, they're just plain lies. Coming back from the military and seeing that my native city got less trees, more pollution, less public transit system, and seeing how people are living and there is no hope. Thinking that I was born in the best country in the world was my religion. I used to absolutely and unconditionally believe in that. It was a given thing for me. And I thought my military experience was that tipping point when I lost my religion. But in fact, thinking about it, I realized, no, it was like with that actual religion thing that I lost until the invasion happened almost 2 months ago. And when I called my relatives, and they supported that madness despite having Ukrainian relatives in Ukraine. My mother, who told me that Americans are people and no people should suffer, was okay with bombing Ukrainian cities. There is no word, no adjective to describe the feelings behind it. I think the real betrayal that ever happened to me was when my own family said that it is okay to bomb people with dog heads, because for years that they lived without me, the propaganda told them that that brotherly nation is not really a nation, because those are not people, those are creatures, and it is okay to kill and bomb creatures. There is no ending from this story. I really wish I could just wake up from this nightmare and realize that none of it happened. But it is an ongoing thing. The only thing that changed, I no longer have to be worried about losing my religion. Thank you.